This is one of the most important videos on this channel, especially if you are a Christian. It's a little bit long, I realize, but make sure you watch this entire video. This will sound very strange, but the death of famous football player Jim Brown, the GOAT, greatest of all time running back in the NFL, on May 18th, 2023, and his prolific acting career in Hollywood movies, and his organization of what was called the Cleveland Summit, or the Muhammad Ali Summit, which was a gathering to discuss Muhammad Ali's conscientious objection to the dictate of the state, and also the death of Muhammad Ali in June of 2016, and the recent Arab League Summit that welcomed back Syria into the League, and also the summit in Paris on the day of Muhammad Ali's death, the Middle East Peace Initiative to discuss what to do about Israel without Israel in attendance and Israel officially condemning the talks, on the same day as the peak of the once in 200 years flood in Paris that flooded downtown Paris and, for example, the famous museum in Paris, and the Super Bowl victory of Jim Brown and his Cleveland Browns, the last time that Cleveland won a major championship before many years later, and the championship win of LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers basketball team, and the Beirut barracks bombing in 1983, the barracks bombing that hinted at Barack Obama, and the pop music band Chicago's only #1 hit for which they received a Grammy Award for, and Barack Obama is from Chicago, and the first United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York City, and President Trump's trumpeting in October of 2020, a national holiday in honor of the United Nations, are all prophecies from God that are predicting that Israel will bomb Iran's nuclear energy and weapons facilities on October 9th, 2023. And then Israel will nuke and completely destroy Damascus, Syria on October 26th, 2023. And are predicting the date that Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president on November 19th, 2023, before he will become the 48th president on November 21st, 2023, and are predicting the date of a catastrophic solar storm explosion on the surface of the sun that will cause a catastrophic coronal mass ejection to hit Earth and knock out the nation's power grid on February 22nd, 2024, and are revealing the date of the resurrection rapture event on May 26th, 2024. And the date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Alright, I have a lot of truly amazing information to share with you in this video. God has done so much with this famous football player, one of the most famous of all time, Jim Brown, the former running back of the Cleveland Browns, which right there is the first thing. The man's name is Brown, and he played for the Browns, and he was famous for playing for the Browns in his 9-year career. And so there's so much information here, there's so much amazing information, and what I did in the past was document this information as it was coming to me in emails that I wrote to some friends. And so the best strategy in explaining the prophetic information and how this is confirming these predictions that I explained at the beginning of this video, I'm just going to read the emails that I wrote to friends. And so the first email is this. Jim Brown died at the age of 87 on May 18th, 2023. Brown is known for his career with the Cleveland Browns. So Brown is known for his career with the Cleveland Browns. It's a coincidence that isn't a coincidence in itself. He is famous for retiring at the peak of his career. He is famous for dominating the league in each of the 9 years he played in the NFL. He was a Pro Bowler in each of the 9 years. He is famous for only playing 9 years in the NFL and retiring early to pursue acting. In other words, in terms of God's signs, the number 9 is associated with Jim Brown. Okay, so not only did Jim Brown play for 9 years, a big part of his story that most people that know football know is that he only played 9 years because he cut his career well short of its completeness in order to pursue acting. And I'll explain the drama surrounding his quitting football. But the point is that he quit football in the middle of his career, arguably, and it was only after 9 years. And so this is a confirmation that this number 9 is associated with Brown. So I think I've explained that enough. It's the case. You know, he's known for 9 years only playing. Okay, now the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of science, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, as from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. Okay, the date on which he died, May 18th, hints at 5 times 18 equals 90. And so that is another confirmation of this significance of the number 9, because in God's signs, God uses the number 90 as symbolism for the number 9. The city of Cleveland identifies the Antichrist that will serve non-consecutive presidential terms, just as the only other president to do so, President Cleveland. Barack Obama will serve non-consecutive terms just like President Cleveland. That's why God uses Cleveland, the city, for prophetic signs as part of signs that identify Barack Obama. The city of Cleveland is connected to the city that the Antichrist is from, Chicago, with the I-90 highway, which is why Brown, who played for Cleveland for 9 years, died on the date May 18th, which hints at the number 90. 5 times 18 equals 90. This isn't the only instance in which God has used the I-90 that connects Chicago and Cleveland. This is the case. Again, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment, and the two cities that God uses as symbolism for Barack Obama in his signs, Chicago and Cleveland, just happen to be connected together with the I-90, which indicates judgment from Barack Obama, the Antichrist. Jim Brown is famous for playing his career in Cleveland. President Cleveland skipped the 23rd presidency. He was the 22nd and 24th president. God pairs 9 and 23 together to reveal the identity of the Antichrist. So the way God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works is it works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And that is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And one simple way in which he would provide second witnesses for us is through pairing certain numbers together, especially the number 9 with certain numbers together, such as the number 23, which happens to be the 9th prime number. And this is because these numbers paired together point to Barack Obama, the Antichrist. And that's a major, maybe even more than half of God's signs is Barack Obama signs. And that's because it's very important for the end times, the Antichrist, okay? So the reason for 9 and 23 is Obama became president in 2009, And he is the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. And he will become the president again and the Antichrist in November of 2023. God pairs 9, 23, and 44 together. Brown retired after 9 years of playing in Cleveland, which is symbolic of the number 23 because Cleveland skipped the 23rd presidency, as I explained, in order to pursue acting. He is credited with 53 acting roles. 53 is the 16th prime number, and 16 and God uses the number 16 in his signs because it hints at 4 times 4, and the 44th president, Barack Obama. So the 44th president, who is the basketball president and wore jersey 23, became president in 2009. And that's why all 3 of these numbers God pairs together. Furthermore, what I probably didn't know at the time of writing this paragraph to my friends is that in college, Jim Brown wore jersey number 44. Okay, so not only did he star in, or is credited with 53 acting roles, and 53 is the 16th prime number, which hints at 44. Jim Brown actually also wore jersey number 44. And so that's case closed that this also is pointing to 44. Jim Brown and his Cleveland team were the last professional sports team in Cleveland to win a championship until player number 23, LeBron James, broke the Cleveland sports curse in 2016. Okay, so that's why a big part of LeBron James and why he's so prophetic in God's signs and why he is repeatedly used. He is one of the 2 goats, greatest of all time, and in the Bible, goat is Antichrist symbolism, and he's a basketball player, and these 2 goats both wore jersey 23. Michael Jordan is the other one. He is from Chicago. LeBron James played for Cleveland, the 2 cities that connect each other with the I-90, and that pairs the 23s of their jersey together with the number 9, as I was mentioning earlier, the pairing of 9 and 23. That's another one for you. And anyway, the big story about LeBron James is how he finally, brought home a championship to Cleveland. I'm not going to go into the whole story of LeBron James, though. But, and so anyway, he broke this Cleveland sports curse while Barack Obama was the president, which hints at the Antichrist curse. And they visited him at the White House. And anyway, this was in 2016, and 2016 hints at 216, which is the area code of Cleveland. And 216 hints at 6 times 6 times 6. And Barack Obama was born on the 216th day of the calendar year. And 666 is the number in Bible prophecy that is associated with the Antichrist. Jim Brown, that's a typo. Jim Brown wore jersey number 32 for Cleveland. LeBron James wore jersey 23. Obama wore 23. Brown and James, or Jim, should be Jim, are said to be goats. So Jim Brown is also said to be a goat, greatest of all time. 32 hints at 23, and so yes, the jersey of Jim Brown hints at 23. And 32 is 4 times 8, and the 48th president is the goat Antichrist. Michelle Obama will become the 47th president after it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on October 17th. Michelle Obama will become the vice president on November 5th and then become the 47th president on November 13th. 6 or 8 days, it's either the 19th or the 21st, when Barack Obama will become the 48th president. And so through having Jim Brown wear jersey 32, God has identified 2 things. It's that it hints at 23 and also 48. Obama will be the 48th president. Jim Brown, who played for Cleveland, which is symbolized by the number 23, played for 9 years, a pairing of 9 and 23 together, died 4,440 hours, which is the equivalent of 185 days, before it is predicted that Obama will become the president on November 19th, 2023. And this is obviously hinting at how Obama is the 44th, the Antichrist is the 44th president. And again, God pairs 44 with these two other numbers here. So this is a pairing of 9, 23, and 44, once again. Jim Brown was born, so by the way, the 19th and 21st, I'm not quite sure because God is pointing to both of those dates. Perhaps it is the case that he will be announced on this date or become the vice president on this date, and then the president on the 21st, something to that, or maybe there'll be an emergency meeting of the Supreme Court on the 19th and then he becomes the president on the 21st or something like that. Anyway, it's either one of the two dates that he will become the president. Jim Brown was born exactly 9,300 days before Obama was born. That's profound. So here we get into one of the first predictions. Okay, so, well, actually, that's a prediction right there. This is the second one. Jim Brown was born exactly 9,300 days before Obama was born. Okay, now 44, the 44th president, hints at the 44th president, 44 people died on Flight 93 on 9/11. And 9/11 was the big judgment warning of impending judgment and destruction of America. And this is one of the main events of 9/11, and it is clear that it is pointing to Obama because it was 44 deaths. And the plane was hijacked and made a sharp turn after it was flying over Cleveland, which is symbolized by the number 23. And so Flight 93 is actually a pairing of 23 and 44 that reveals the identity of the Antichrist. And God pairs 9 and 23 and 44 together. And Jim Brown is famous for his 9 years that he played for Cleveland, in Cleveland. And he's also famous for the Cleveland Summit. And so that's why Jim Brown was born exactly 9,300 days before Obama was born. It's because it is pointing to Flight 93 that was hijacked and turned around over Cleveland, on which there were 44 deaths. And again, God pairs certain numbers together to confirm the signs and connections. This is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And that is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And one simple way in which he would provide second and third witnesses to confirm a matter is through pairing certain numbers together, specifically 9, 23, and 44, because the 44th president, the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school, became the president in 2009 and will become the president again and the Antichrist in 2023. President Cleveland was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. He skipped the 23rd presidency, which is why Obama wore jersey number 23, and that was the presidency of Benjamin Harrison, and Obama will become the president through the death of Kamala Harris. And Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd president, was part of the only grandfather-grandson presidents. It was William Harrison that was the 9th president, which pairs 9 and 23 together. And William Harrison died while in office, just like Kamala Harris will die in office, which will allow Obama to become the president again after serving non-consecutive terms, just like President Cleveland. And so, once again, Jim Brown is famous for his 9 years playing for Cleveland, and the city of Cleveland hints at President Cleveland, who skipped the 23rd presidency, and Barack Obama was the 44th president, and there were 44 deaths on Flight 93 that turned around over Cleveland. And Brown died exactly 40 weeks. Okay, so God uses 40 weeks connections in his signs because when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. And according to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. And this is why God uses 40 weeks connections in between relevant prophetic signs. And this is relevant because Jim Brown is a 93 number because he died, or he was born 9,300 days before Obama was born. Okay? And again, Brown wore 44, Jersey 44, okay? And 44 people died in Flight 93. That's another confirmation of the prophetic relevance of 9,300 days. It's confirmed because of Flight 93. Jim Brown wore jersey number 44. Okay? Brown died exactly 40 weeks, which hints at the birth pains of the end times, as I just explained, before a catastrophic solar flare on the sun is predicted on February 22nd, 2024. And the sun is 93 million miles away. And that's why Flight 93, that's why the number 93 in Flight 93 as part of the signs on 9/11 that God used to warn of the judgment and destruction of 9/11, the walls of security collapsing, which is why they collapsed towers on 9/11 that were 110 stories high, because Joshua died at the age of 110 and he led the Hebrews around the walls of security of ancient Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment. Okay, so Brown died exactly 40 weeks before the sun will send a catastrophic solar flare that will knock out the nation's power grid, and the sun is 93 million miles away from Earth. And that's why Brown died exactly 40 weeks before it, because Brown was born 9,300 days before Obama was born. And out of the power grid failure, there will be food shortages, which Obama will use to take control of the food supply and then use to enforce the mark of the Antichrist through the restriction of the ability to purchase food. Okay? So, at the time of Brown's death, at the same time as Brown's death was reported on May 19th. So his death wasn't reported until the 19th. It was reported that Obama was on a list of 500 people banned from entering Russia. G500, the 500th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, is the word for Antichrist. Brown died at the age of 87. Okay, so so by the way, that of course is confirmation that Obama is the Antichrist, because that's why this event happened on the day of this news of Brown, and Brown died 9,300 days before Obama was born. Okay, so that's why 500 people. He's on a list of 500 people because he's the Antichrist. Brown died at the age of 87 on this day, and Revelation 8:7 describes the solar flare hit from the sun. That's why Brown died at 87, 40 weeks before the sun event, because it's described in Revelation 8:7. So, arguably, a video could have been made just on this alone, because this is an amazing thing. It's worthy of putting up high and, shouting about and by itself. And so that's why I could have made a video about this just in itself. It would have been a very short video, but still. And but the thing is that there's so many predictions with Jim Brown. Why make 10 videos of Jim Brown? Let's just do it all in one video, I figure, because it makes more sense this way. You get a more complete picture of what's going on with Jim Brown as well. So, all right, now we're getting into some profound things about Jim Brown and his career and his life. Jim Brown is famous for organizing the famous Cleveland Summit. So this is another use of Cleveland. This had nothing to do with the Browns football team, although, of course, the reason why it was Cleveland, I'm sure, is because Brown was probably living in Cleveland at the time, although I don't know that for sure. I'm just guessing. The Cleveland Summit is otherwise known as the Muhammad Ali Summit. The Cleveland Summit, but the point is that God named this summit Cleveland is because to confirm it's part of these signs, which I have explained now, point to the Antichrist, because President Cleveland was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, just like Barack Obama will. And by the way, he skipped the 23rd presidency, and Obama will skip the 45th presidency of President Trump. President Trump's presidency was for the purpose primarily of trumpeting the arrival of the Antichrist and destruction of America, which is why, incidentally, Trump rose in status a long time before he ran for president through his role in calling out, trumpeting how Obama was not born in America and how he was born in Kenya. There's a long history between the two, but the reason why I was going off onto that tangent is that 45 is the 9th triangular number, and 23 is the 9th prime number. And that's why these two presidencies are skipped, the 23rd and 45th. The Cleveland Summit on June 4th, 2023 was exactly 42 years. Okay, now 42 years is Antichrist symbolism because in the Bible, in Bible prophecy, 42 months is said to be the symbolic period of the Antichrist and is mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy. And so the number 42 in a period of time especially is symbolic of the Antichrist. This is 42 years exactly. So this is a clear Antichrist connection here from this Cleveland Summit. And so the Cleveland Summit sorry, this is a typo. What year was that? So Obama was 2009, so it was 1966, which is interesting actually, because 66 hints at the Antichrist as well, and in Bible prophecy, the number of the Antichrist is 666, but that is also mentioned in the 66th book in the Bible. Okay, so it was 1966, the Cleveland Summit, and which was the Muhammad Ali Summit. This was exactly 42 years before Obama was in Cairo, Egypt. When he went down to Egypt, that hinted at Isaiah chapter 31, which describes the Antichrist and his defeat at the second coming of the Messiah. The chapter begins with, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt and rely on horses." And Obama is the American Pharaoh, the first Triple Crown winner in 444 months in 2015 was American Pharaoh, the horse American Pharaoh. 444 months earlier in 1978 was the last Triple Crown winner, and that, of course, hints at the 44th president, the American Pharaoh. But Obama went down to Cairo, Egypt to deliver his famous Cairo, Egypt speech right after he became president, in order to tell the Muslim world that America is no longer a Christian nation. So relax, in other words. You know, that's the point of why he did that. Very Antichrist. And when he was there, the Egyptians were saying he was the new King Tut of the world. The media was saying that as well, which makes that also Antichrist symbolism, because the king of Egypt in the Bible is symbolic or a type foreshadow of the Antichrist. Okay, so this the day that Obama was in Cairo, Egypt, was exactly 726 weeks before this prophetic date and prophetic signs on May 4th, 2023, which included the Kentucky Derby sign. Speaking of American Pharaoh and the Kentucky Derby. And these signs are explained in other videos, so I won't explain it here. But 726 God uses because it is the number of the word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance that is the word for rapture, the 726th word. And the rapture, if you don't know, is the event when God's faithful will be rescued and escape the coming severe persecution from the Antichrist. The Kentucky Derby sign on May 6th, 2023, there was two Kentucky Derby signs, right? Because the sign that involved the Kentucky Derby on this day was on the date 5/4, was how in 5 days there were 4 horses that died on the racetrack. And on and on. That's explained in other videos. But the Kentucky Derby sign and the race itself was on the 6th. And it too was a rapture sign. And it is 386 days. And that hints at the 386th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, which is the word for resurrection. Because the rapture is a resurrection rapture. Those that have died already will be resurrected. This is 386 days before the rapture, which will be on May 26th, 2024, Pentecost in the calendar that watches for new moons. So the 54th Massachusetts Regiment was the first sent to St. Simons Island, where Jim Brown was born. So Jim Brown was born on St. Simons Island. And there was a St. Simons Island on April 15th this year as well. That's explained in another video. It was an evacuation and fire. It's part of a trail of signs that's leading to the predicted dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan. But anyway, the 54th Massachusetts signs that God is pointing to, the 1st Black Regiment, they, after completing their training, were first sent to St. Simons Island in Georgia, and that's where Jim Brown was born. And so here's a roundabout connection between Jim Brown and St. Simons Island and the Antichrist. Okay, so we have another prediction in here though, by the way, is that the rapture will be on May 26th, and Jim Brown connects to that because the Cleveland Summit that he organized was exactly 42 years before Obama went down to Cairo, Egypt, which is in turn 726 weeks before these important signs on this date, which are about the rapture. And then the rapture is 386 days before, these rapture signs are 386 days before the rapture. And the confirmation of all of that is the in-between date, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment signs, is relevant because Jim Brown was born on the island of St. Simons. So if you initially thought that this was a little bit far-fetched, now that I summarized it with more clarity, you can see that it isn't. St. Simons Island is next to Jekyll Island, where the Federal Reserve was created. Jim Brown was born 8,101 days before after the creation of the Federal Reserve. 8,101 is the 1,019th prime number. I forget how I would have thought to look that up. It must have been the Holy Spirit. 1,119 hints at 9/11. That's a clear hinting at 9/11. God uses numbers and signs with 2 1s and a 9 as symbolism for 9/11. And the World Trade Center hints at the coming Federal Reserve currency, and as does Jekyll Island, and as does the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, by the way. Because the thing about them, the reason why God is pointing to the 54th Massachusetts Regiment is that it was the first black regiment in the Civil War that was fought to abolish slavery. And if you think that's controversial, well, know that the 54th Massachusetts was in it for that reason, the first black regiment, and so a big part of the story of this of the 54th is that they were treated unequally and were not paid the same amount of salary that the other white northern soldiers were paid, which was $13 a month, which hinted at the 13th Amendment, which was used to abolish slavery. And this theme of slavery and freedom is the theme of the Bible and is the theme of life. And America is being destroyed in its pursuit of slavery by the forces of totalitarianism and communism, a modern day form of it, if you will, and the blue team, in other words, the godless team. And so their leader is the Antichrist, who will continue the already in progress persecution of the minority, just like the 54th Regiment was, because the official policy from Washington was to pay them less than the other soldiers. And so it was an oppressive minority law, and the Antichrist will enforce through the Antichrist system, which will be handed to him. He won't create it. It's already being created and will be handed to him in order to enforce the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing. And you know what I'm talking about. The thing that you can't talk about is the mark of the Antichrist. And if you have an understanding of Bible prophecy and commonly held objections that tell you that it isn't, you are incorrect. And the answers to your commonly held objections are addressed in the snake bite video. Make sure you watch it. But the predictions being made in this video will prove this, and this is the purpose of the predictions. It is the reason why God has given me a voice and why God has made these predictions is for the purpose of proving this to you. In other words, when the prediction comes to pass, this will be the end of the debate. Case closed. No more controversy. It is finished. It is a fact. No more speculation of whether it is or isn't. It is the mark of the Antichrist. That's the purpose of the prediction. Without this purpose for the prediction, there would be no purpose for this video or this prediction from God. Okay, so make no mistake. And so, yes. So the Antichrist will enforce the mark of the Antichrist through the rationing of food and the digital currency from the Federal Reserve. That's why Jekyll Island in the connections here, okay? And St. Simons Island is next to Jekyll Island. No one really lives on Jekyll Island. Jim Brown couldn't have really been born on Jekyll Island. He was born on St. Simons Island, and furthermore, that connects him to the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which is about the $13, which is symbolism for the currency from the Federal Reserve, which is next to St. Simons Island, that will be programmed to be able to restrict people from buying food that haven't taken the mark of the Antichrist, the thing, which will be implemented, the enforcement after the solar flare from the sun will knock out the nation's power grid and cause food shortages. So see how it all ties together through this guy, Jim Brown. It's amazing what God has done here. Okay? Now, St. Simons Island, so I just explained that. Now, after the eruption on the sun, there will be food shortages and rationing that will be enforced through digital currency that the Fed will create. That's what I just explained. Okay. The analysis in this video explains how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections pointed to the date September 4th, 2023, and this video explains why it was believed that September 4th would be the predicted date that Israel would nuke and completely destroy Damascus, Syria, and fulfill the prophecy in the 17th chapter of the book of Isaiah in the Bible. Since the time of the original production of this video, God's signs have revealed more knowledge, and instead of nuking Damascus, Syria on September 4th, it is now predicted that Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria on October 26th, 2023, and fulfill Isaiah chapter 17, 17 days after it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran on October 9th. September 4th ended up being a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the predicted date that Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria. September 4th was the day of the prophetic Burning Man sign, the amazing details of which are explained in the must-watch Burning Man prophecy video. Every year at the end of the Burning Man festival, 70,000 quote-unquote burners leave en masse in what is called the Exodus. This year, the Exodus was a muddy disaster when the Playa Desert sand turned to mud due to unprecedented rain. The quote-unquote burners were trapped for days before they were finally allowed to begin the Exodus at 14 o'clock local time on September 4th, 1400 military time. The reason the Exodus began at 14 o'clock was because the disastrous Burning Man Exodus is symbolism for an evacuation, and it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant and cause an evacuation in southwest Iran on October 9th, 14 days after it is predicted that a dirty bomb or suitcase nuke will be detonated in Manhattan, New York City, and cause an evacuation of Manhattan Island on September 25th. More is explained in the Burning Man video, but this is also why DJ Diplo and Chris Rock were part of this Burning Man news story, and why the video of them leaving Burning Man in the back of a pickup truck went viral. They left Burning Man with Austin Butler, who played Elvis in the recent Elvis movie, and also on September 4th was the world premiere of the new movie about Elvis's relationship with 14-year-old Priscilla. Also, the predicted evacuation in southwest Iran on October 9th will be 35 days after the prophetic Exodus evacuation from Burning Man on September 4th, and the nation of Persia was renamed Iran in 1935. And the 35th chapter of the book of Isaiah in the Bible is a prophecy about the parched land of the desert becoming a pool of water, and about a road that God's ransomed will travel on called Highway of Holiness. The burners in their exodus out of the parched land that had been turned to pools of water traveled down what is called Gate Road, and in the Bible, judgment on a people symbolically begins at the gate. The prophetic Burning Man Exodus on September 4th, that was the result of sand turning to mud, was 9 days after Bob Barker died at the age of 99 on August 26th, and Barker is famous for his fight scene in a movie with Jewish comedian Adam Sandler, in which Sandler is thrown into water and is soaking wet, which hints at the sand turning to mud at Burning Man 9 days after Sandler's tribute tweet to Barker on the day he died at the age of 99. Barker rhymes with Bushehr, and the fight between Barker and the Jewish comedian hints at the fight between the Jewish nation Israel and Iran when Israel will bomb Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant. Barker hosted the TV game show The Price is Right for a record 35 years, and Persia was renamed Iran in 1935. The name Bob Barker in English gematria is equal to 444, and on the day that the host of The Price is Right died, news broke that the U.S. Marines are buying, for the right price, 44 of Israel's Iron Dome launchers. This was on August 26th, which is 44 days before it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant on October 9th, which will be 17 days before it is predicted that Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria on October 26th and fulfill Isaiah chapter 17. In Hebrew gematria, Damascus, Syria is 999, and in the Bible, the number 9 is symbolic of God's judgment. And in the Bible, the city of Damascus is symbolic of the world. God will judge the world that will be led by the Antichrist after it attempts to destroy Israel and make Jerusalem an international city. It is predicted that there will be an evacuation in southwest Iran 14 days after it is predicted that there will be an evacuation in New York City on September 25th. September 25th will be exactly 9 years, which symbolizes judgment, after the birth of the second of 2 prophetic cows, born with the number 7 on its forehead. These cows pointed to the king of Egypt's dream in the Bible about 14 cows. In the dream, the 14 cows are separated into 2 sets of 7 cows, and the latter 7 cows are symbolic of the end times period of 7 years of the Antichrist. In Bible prophecy, it is said that this symbolic 7 years of the Antichrist begins after 69 sets of 7 years. This is why at the same time that the 7 cow was born on September 25th, 2014, the Antichrist spoke at the opening of the 69th UN General Assembly in New York City, which is exactly 9 years, which symbolizes judgment, before it is predicted that a dirty bomb or suitcase nuke will explode in New York City, which will lead to an evacuation of New York City, and this will be 14 days before it is predicted that there will be an evacuation in southwest Iran after it is bombed by Israel. These 14 days in between these 2 evacuations are hinted at with this connection to the 14 cows. So, within the news about the Arab League summit, it was discovered that a certain symbolic leader attended on May 19th, which is again the day of the news of the death of Jim Brown and the day that Obama was reported to be on the list of 500 people that cannot enter Russia. Yep, the 44-year-old, the first Jewish leader, okay, that's important in a second, as I will explain, who, right before the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, had not coincidentally, in other words, designed by God, turned 44 years old at the time that the nation of Ukraine was made up of 44 million people before the Exodus, as in the Exodus of the Hebrews from Egypt that escaped persecution from the king of Egypt and the people of Egypt, which is symbolic of the Antichrist and the Antichrist system of the blue team. Yep, the 44-year-old leader of 44 million people spoke at the Arab Summit. This was symbolic for Syria, as Syria was welcomed back into the Arab League after many years. Okay, this is stunning. Damascus, Syria is 999 in Hebrew gematria. So Hebrew letters are also numbers, just like Roman letters are also numbers. And the numeric value of Damascus, Syria is 999. It is predicted that Israel will nuke Damascus 99 days after May 19th. And that's why the first Jewish leader of Ukraine is being used in God's signs. But obviously I forgot to mention the fact that he was 44 years old and leading 44 million people at the beginning of the war is confirmation that God is using Zelensky as Antichrist symbolism to point to the 44th president, to identify the 44th president. Okay, and so anyway, he spoke at the Arab League summit. This 44-year-old leader of 44 million spoke at the Arab League summit 99 days before it is predicted that Israel will nuke Damascus. Okay, now I wrote this before it was learned that August 26th is the day that Israel will bomb Iran, and then 9 days later will bomb Damascus. Okay, so it's 99 days and then 9 days to the date that Israel will nuke Damascus, which gives us the 999. Okay, that's why this is astounding. Truly, okay? And also, again, don't forget that Jim Brown is the number 9 here. But then again, we aren't exactly talking about Jim Brown here yet, are we? Well, yes, we are, because this was the day, of course, because Jim Brown, this visit of this leader on this date, 5/19, was the date of the news of Jim Brown's death. And so from that date, it is 99 days and then 9 days to the day that Israel will nuke Damascus in Syria. And this was the day that the symbolic Antichrist figure leader was at a surprise visit at the Arab League summit. And that summit was known for welcoming back Syria. And it's the first Jewish leader, which hints at Israel. So Israel, 99 days and 9 days later, will nuke Damascus, Syria, after this prophetic sign. It's just amazing. And again, Brown is known for number 9 because of his 9-year career with the Cleveland Browns. And okay, so and 9 Pro Bowls and all of that. And also for the date that he died, 5/18, which hints at 5 times 18 equals 90. Okay, so where was there another 9 on 5/19? Yes, Jim Brown, as I just explained. Although he died on 5/18, the news came out on 5/19. Brown was known for 9 years with Cleveland. Why is Brown relevant? Jim Brown, because as the Jim Brown email explains, Brown is tied to Obama through symbolism. Brown's college jersey number 44 was retired. His college team retired his number. And Damascus is symbolized by the number 44, which is explained in other videos. Make sure you watch all of the videos. Obviously, when the prediction comes to pass, you will know that you need to watch every single minute of every video on this channel. So the news of the death of the GOAT, greatest of all time, number 44, that played 9 years in Cleveland, which is symbolized by 23, came out on 5/19 on the day of the news that Obama was one of the 500 banned from Russia, and the day that the leader of the 44-year-old of 44 million was at the Arab League summit. 99 days before, and then 9 days, 99 days before Israel will bomb Iran, and then another 9 days before it will nuke Damascus, which is symbolized by 444, which will lead to the GOAT Antichrist on the Temple Mount. And that's the big thing here. This is why this is all relevant, because Jim Brown is a GOAT. GOAT is Antichrist symbolism, greatest of all time. And out of the ashes of this nuking of Damascus, there will be a call to, in the name of peace, establish peace, and also make Jerusalem an international city, and which will be led by the 2 antichrists, Pope Francis and Barack Obama. And they will be on the Temple Mount in the end times, as described in Bible prophecy, as I just mentioned earlier in Isaiah chapter 31, for example, which begins with woe to those who go down to Egypt, which is why right after he became president, one of the first things he did was go down to Egypt. Okay, and so I think we got this here. So this is Again, I could have made a video just on this in itself, this how the death of Jim Brown is revealing the date that Israel will bomb Iran and nuke Damascus, Syria. It's just astounding. Jim Brown wore jersey 44, which is again symbolic of Damascus, which again is explained in other videos. He is known for quitting football to pursue acting. The reason is if I could summarize with because the thing is, to explain it properly, it takes like 2 minutes, but I don't have it all memorized to just, spit it out. But Damascus is symbolism in the Bible, is symbolic of the world. And that's why it is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world, is because Isaiah chapter 17 describes the destruction of Damascus suddenly and overnight, which must be due to a nuclear bomb. And the thing is that it will never be inhabited again. And we therefore know that this has never happened in history, because Damascus is the oldest continuously inhabited city. Now, E.W. Bullinger says that the number 4, if you don't know who that is, he's like an authority on Bible numbers. The symbolic meaning of significance of numbers in the Bible. The number 4 is symbolic of the world, the material world, the created things, and the number of the city number. Okay, so anyway, that's why Damascus is in a nutshell. It is symbolized by 444 or 44. Oh, and also the 444th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for man. Man is 444, which is, by the way, the reason for 666. That's also symbolic of man, because man was created on the 6th day, which is why the Antichrist that leads the man-made religion, Catholicism, with a man at the top and a hierarchy of men whom you have to go to get your salvation through taking the bread from the piece of bread from the man, and then confessing your sins to the man, and then doing them again. Catholicism, the wolf in sheep's clothing, which isn't Christianity at all. I mean, it's designed to appear like Christianity, to fool people. And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-Catholic. And nor do I believe that all Catholics aren't saved, in the process of being saved, because no one is saved past tense. And but if they are on the path to salvation, it's in spite of their Catholicism, not because of it. Because Catholicism is designed to steer people away from the Bible. That's the point. You get caught up in the rituals and you think that you're all good, and that's why the vast majority of Catholics don't even read the Bible, or have never even read it, perhaps. Okay? So anyway, that's why it's the wolf in sheep's clothing. Jim Brown wore jersey number 44. He is known for quitting football. So here we get into something really interesting too. More about this background of Jim Brown. He is known for quitting football to pursue acting. He is credited with 53 roles. Again, 53 is the 16th prime number, which is at 4 times 4 and 44. And God uses firsts in his signs for prophetic signs. The first movie he acted in premiered at the famous Cleveland Hippodrome Theater. He had many of his Cleveland teammates join him for the movie. This was on the 23rd of October in 1964. Okay, this was exactly 40 weeks, which is again symbolic of birth pains and the end times and the Antichrist, after Michelle Obama was born on January 17th in 1964. It was also exactly 6 times 6 times 6 months 216 months, which is the equivalent of 18 years, and 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And therefore, this connection is clear 666 Antichrist symbolism. After the first UN General Assembly meeting in New York City on October 23rd, 1946. Okay? So I just want to rewind here. You know, Jim Brown played for Cleveland. He had his Cleveland teammates. Cleveland is, again, symbolic of 23. The first premiere of his first acting role was on the 23rd of October. And this was exactly an extremely prophetic 40 weeks after Michelle Obama was born. And Michelle Obama, okay, the date 117 hints at 1117, which in the Hebrew Old Testament concordance, Strong's concordance, is the word Bama, which means high place. And Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And in the Bible, high place is a metaphor for heaven. For example, it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place, a metaphor for heaven. And the name Barak in Hebrew is lightning. And in the language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic, O is from. And so lightning from heaven, which is what Jesus said in Luke 10:18, is Barack Obama. Either Jesus didn't know what he was saying when he said this, or he knew that there would be a famous president named Barack Obama and said this anyway, knowing that it would confuse us, or he was revealing the identity of the Antichrist. Obviously, the latter option is the only one that makes any sense. And Michelle Obama will be part of how Barack Obama will become the president again. As I mentioned earlier, she will become the 47th president after the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash, predicted to be on October 17th, which, by the way, is also a date that hints at 117 and 1117, and she will fall from the high place in her airplane. Okay, so again, his first movie on the 23rd of October is exactly 40, well, okay, and it's also, this first movie premiered exactly 6 times 6 times 6 months, which is also 6 plus 6 plus 6 years after the first UN General Assembly meeting in New York City on October 23rd, 1946. His first movie premiere was also exactly 4 plus 4 plus 4 years before the music band Chicago. Obama is from Chicago. God uses Chicago to point to Barack Obama. There's a band named Chicago, a very famous one. And it was their first #1 hit. It was exactly 4 plus 4 plus 4 years, which hints at the 44th president, who is from Chicago. There was their first #1 hit, for which they received their only Grammy Award. Okay, the song topped the chart on October 23rd, the same date, in 1976, which was exactly 4 plus 4 years after the first premiere of his movie. Okay, and by the way, that's a pairing of 44 and 23, because it's the 23rd of the month, first of all, which confirms the signs and connections. As I explained, God, second and third witnesses confirm the matter. This 444 not only pairs with Chicago and the 44th president, that in itself is a second witness, but we also have another third witness, which is the 23rd of the month and the 23rd of the month in 1964 and 1976. And also, we're talking about Cleveland, which is symbolized by the number 23, because the premiere of the movie was in the Hippodrome, the famous theater in Cleveland. And his teammates from Cleveland were also in the theater. Okay, now, this song topped the chart on October 23rd, 1976, exactly 7 years, which hints at the most central prophecy in the Bible in Daniel chapter 9, which describes the end times and the period of the Antichrist. This symbolic 7 years, which symbolically began in 2017, with many symbolic firsts. The first year of Trump's presidency trumpeting the end times for one thing. Okay? So anyway, this Song of Chicago topped the chart exactly 7 years, which is symbolic of the Antichrist, before the Beirut barracks bombings on October 23rd, 1983. The Beirut barracks bombings hints at Barack. This is an astounding revelation here. This prophetic sign of the Beirut barracks is a hint at Barack Obama, as in Barack Obama. Okay? So these Barack bombings were exactly 444 months before Trump trumpeted and declared UN Day a national holiday on October 23rd, 2020. Why did he do that? The only explanation can be it is because God had him do it. Anyway, Trump trumpeted the first, speaking of firsts, right? This was in the first UN assembly, connects to the first declaration that there be a UN Day as a national holiday in America. This Marxist globalist organization that Trump trumpeted against at the same time. So anyway, he trumpeted this he signed the order, the executive order or whatever, on this date. Okay? Trump was born in New York City, and that's where the UN is, and he declared the first UN Day in America exactly 888 months after the first UN General Assembly in New York City on October 23rd, 1946. So I'll just rewind here. This 888 months is broken into two sets of 444 months, right? Because again, we have from the first General Assembly in 1946, we have the 18 years connection to the Jim Brown movie, and then 12 years, which gives us 30 years to the Chicago song, and then another 7 years to the barrack bombings, which is a total of 37 years, which is 444 months. And then from the barrack bombings, as in Barack Obama, we have another 444 months to the date that Trump trumpeted the UN national holiday. And so we have a clear full circle connection here between the first UN and Trump's trumpeting the UN. In other words, this is absolutely, without a doubt, from God. Okay? What I have just explained in the last couple of minutes here is extremely important. These are major prophetic signs. This is a major connection here. Barack Obama will lead the United Nations, or some version of it, in the final period, beginning next year in 2024. Or maybe by the end of this year, actually, in December or something of 2023. Okay, so, and yeah, okay, so you get, by the way, 888 is, if I didn't mention in this video already, the numeric value of the name Jesus, because Greek letters are also numbers, and the numeric value of the name Jesus is 888. So we have the two connections here. The roundabout indirect trail between the UN General Assembly, the first one, symbolic first one, the beginning of the UN, the Antichrist UN, to Trump trumpeting the UN, which is, it is an Antichrist sign. Not that Trump is Antichrist, but, or Antichrist symbolism in the least, but it is trumpeting the UN, and it's 888, which is the number of Jesus, and Jesus will return after the transgressions against God that the world will do collectively through the UN. Okay? And it will regard Israel too. So, so the day that Trump trumpeted the UN was 131 days after Trump, the 45th president, was born. Okay, no, sorry. The first General Assembly, this is huge. I forgot about this. The first UN General Assembly meeting, the symbolic beginning of the UN, which, by the way, a part of the UN is the World Health Organization, all right, which is, communism isn't the right word because it is in a way, though. It's led by a communist, the guy from Ethiopia, who was a former radical socialist revolutionary. And that's the reason, by the way, the reason why he heads the World Health Organization. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy fact that there are Reds, communists in the United Nations organization, and they hire their own, and etc. It is a conspiracy of communists. Communism didn't die. There are new versions of it, though. It's evolved. It's not like Stalinism per se. It's new versions of it, like climate change, etc. Okay? So anyway, this is amazing. Let me explain this. Trump was born, the 45th president was born 131 days before the first UN General Assembly. Okay? And he was born in New York, and the first assembly was in New York. Now, why is that important? Because of the 131st word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, which is the word for the red stuff, the red liquid that runs through the veins of people. Disease. It's that disease, okay? You know what I'm talking about? The thing that runs through people's veins, disease, is this word. It's used once describing the woman that had the thing disease, okay? And okay, so that's why 131. And the reason for that is because the UN is involved in the thing disease, that's created from the thing that they put inside people, that the World Health Organization is in the process of dictating to the world that it be done. It's in the process currently of gathering the legal authority to do that. And many nations are going along with it, because the world is hypnotized by the spirit of Antichrist currently. This is astounding, okay? Now, what is confirmation of this is that President Trump, the 45th president, was born exactly 45 years after the Rockefeller Institute was founded. And the Rockefeller Institute is key, instrumental in the pioneering of the thing, which is the thing that you can't talk about, the things that people put inside themselves with a thing, with a sharp thing that is like a snake bite. Okay, so I said something that I'm going to delete from the video, so I'm just going to try to pick up where I think I left off. And so yes, the Rockefeller Institute is instrumental in the history of the things, okay? Like, very instrumental. More importantly, actually, the Rockefeller Institute is what caused the Spanish flu. Okay? That thing that happened in 1918 that killed 50 to 100 million people was the result of the EXP, you know what I'm talking about, the EXP thing, toll thing, that was done at the what's the name of the camp? Fort Wiley, I believe, in Kansas. And the thing that they gave to the soldiers is what caused Spanish flu. And that's a fact. Spanish flu, the lie that has been propagated that Spanish flu was influenza is a lie. And it was not that. It was it was a bacterial infection. It was a respiratory bacteria infection that spread. So anyway, but that lie needed to be spread in order to further the thing industry, and the supposed corpse that was exhumed excavated in Scandinavia, in the frozen tundra, that supposedly provided the thing for Spanish flu, is a lie. That paper was written by you-know-who, the man whose name in Latin means sickle, as in the sickle in Revelation chapter 14 that is used to harvest the grapes that are thrown into the winepress of God's wrath. So his last name is an Italian name. He is the head of the national NIAID, the National Institute of, anyway, the NIAID. So you know who I'm talking about, the most famous guy, okay? That guy, he wrote that paper, and he is the biggest liar of history, and responsible for millions of deaths. And a mafia man. Truly, like in the literal sense. Okay, so anyway, which isn't it's not a coincidence that he's Italian, by the way. That's the purpose of that was designed by God to confirm what I have just said, the symbolism in that. Okay, so let's see. So the 45th president was born exactly 45 years after the Institute was founded, which is responsible for things, and the 45th president was born 131, which hints at the thing disease, the red liquid inside people's blood. Okay, before the first assembly of the UN, and they will be instrumental in the end times, and the Antichrist implementing the thing, the mark of the Antichrist. Okay. Now. Let's see. So October 23rd, 2020 was 923 days before this May 4th date again, which I already mentioned earlier, which was the day of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment signs, the Kentucky Derby signs, which is explained in other videos. But one of the signs on that day was the surprise visit of the 44-year-old of the 44 million nation to the International Criminal Court. Okay, which will be used, which was created for condemning war crimes. And after Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria, which is symbolized by 444, it will condemn Israel for war crimes. Okay, and that day that the 44-year-old of 44 million visited the International Criminal Court was 4 times 4 days before May 20th. 2023, and that was the day that he made a surprise visit to the G7 summit in Hiroshima, which is the location of the first nuclear bomb that was used in an act of war, which is hinting at the next use of the nuclear bomb in an act of war, which will destroy Damascus, which is symbolized by 444, which will be condemned by the International Criminal Court. That's why the 4 times 4 days connection, because it's hinting at 44, the number of the Antichrist, the 44th president. God uses firsts in his signs for prophetic signs. In the movie 100 Rifles, Jim Brown was part of one of the first interracial love scenes and the first interracial love scene in a major Hollywood movie. That's a major first. The plot of 100 Rifles involves conflict between different ethnic groups. Jim Brown, who wore jersey number 44, which was retired by his college, died on May 18th, 2023, 100 days before it is predicted. That's a typo. And if you don't believe me, down here is the date that this email is composed. Furthermore, the date that this video is posted proves that as well. Okay, so he died 100 days. The actor that starred in 100 Rifles in the first, which confirms that it's a prophetic sign, the first interracial love scene, he died 100 days before it is predicted that Israel will nuke Damascus, okay, which is symbolized by 444. Now, the thing is, 100 Rifles is about conflict between ethnic groups, and that's what this is. You know, the Jews versus the Arabs, right? And 100 days not only is it's also the equivalent of 144,000 minutes, which is a prominent prophetic number in the book of Revelation, the end times book. So this is an astounding confirmation here too, because we already established earlier that Jim Brown connects to the day that Israel will bomb Iran. Okay? Oh, wait a second. So, sorry. This is the day that Israel will bomb Iran. Okay, 100 days later is the day that Israel will bomb Iran. Okay, so again, Jim Brown died on May 18th, and the following day was the news of the death. And that was the day of the summit, the Arab summit, and the welcoming back of Syria, and the attendance of the leader of Ukraine, the 44-year-old of 44 million. Okay, as I explained, that day was 99 days, and then 9 days to the day that Israel will nuke Damascus, but it's 99 days. The 19th is 99 days to August 26th. The day before, May 18th, is 100 days to August 26th. And that's also relevant, okay? Because this was the day that Jim Brown died. The 19th was the day that the news of his death. And again, Jim Brown is associated with the number 9. That's why 99 days. But also Jim Brown starred in the first interracial love scene in this movie 100 Rifles about ethnic conflict between two ethnic groups. And 100 days later is when Israel will bomb Iran, which is obviously a conflict between two ethnic groups. So this is an amazing connection that God established as well. Why is God using Jim Brown and signs that point to Israel? First, the signs contain Obama symbolism, and Obama and the world will gang up on Israel, but also as the Antichrist. But also, Brown is known for being a political activist. His Cleveland summit was about war. That's another thing. So, Jim Brown, through this prophetic sign of the Cleveland summit, which I will explain in a minute, is about war, because that's what this summit was about. It was about Muhammad Ali's conscientious objection to being drafted in the war, okay, which I'll explain in a second. All right, and okay, there you go. All right, so as I wrote to my friends here, I said, all right, I think the last theory as to why God used Jim Brown needs to be refined a bit. He is symbolic of protest because of the Cleveland summit, and specifically civil rights. The Cleveland summit was about Muhammad Ali's descent on religious grounds to not submit to the draft for the war. This hints at civil rights, protesting and dissenting on religious grounds, to not take the thing that is the mark of the Antichrist. That's what this is all about here, okay? Muhammad Ali's dissent from the state and the majority on religious grounds, to not submit because of his conscientious objection to the draft of the war, okay? The forced draft is related to the forced things. This is why Brown's number was 32, and why the only time he won the championship was the 32nd NFL championship. Okay? This is why the next time that Cleveland won a championship was with the breaking of a sports curse in 2016, which again hints at 216 and 6 times 6 times 6, and Antichrist curse, mark of the Antichrist. Okay? Come to think of it, Brown was known for being a physical freak of nature, a beast. Okay, so the mark of the Antichrist is the mark of the, physical freak of nature, beast. So the reason why, though, he won, this is very important. The whole LeBron James thing, in fact, also points back to Jim Brown. And LeBron James is huge in his science, but it all points back to Jim Brown's championship, because the whole thing about LeBron James is that he won the championship for Cleveland that hadn't won it since, the early 1960s. I forget the year. It was one of the longest sports droughts in, for a city, right? And it was known as the Cleveland sports curse. And furthermore, the Antichrist mentioned this when Cleveland visited him at the White House. He mentioned the sports curse of Cleveland, because he is the Antichrist curse, okay, on America for not repenting and rebelling against God. That's why the Antichrist curse. So, but anyway, he won the 36. So it all points back to when Jim Brown won the championship the last time for Cleveland, which was the 32nd championship in the NFL, and Jim Brown wore jersey 32. So this is the reason why Jim Brown needed to wear 32 for God's science. The reason why is this. The 32nd prime number is 131, as in G131, which is the word for this, if you can read it. If you're listening and you're not watching the screen, the thing I mentioned earlier, the red liquid that runs through people's veins, disease. This is the reason for Jim Brown. Okay? This is the biggest reason for Jim Brown here. His victory in the 32nd NFL championship, and why he wore number 32, it's to point to the 32nd prime number. And again, that was the number of days, 131 days, between the first, between his birth and the first UN General Assembly, which again connected with 6 + 6 + 6 years to Jim Brown's first premiere of him in a movie. So you can see that this isn't the only connection to the number 131, because it connects with the 131 days between Trump's birth and the first UN General Assembly. Right? That's also how Jim Brown number 32 connects to the number 131. It's very clear. This is the big reason for Jim Brown. It's identifying the mark of the Antichrist. Again, the prediction being made, any of these predictions, when they come to pass, will prove what I am saying. That this is the mark of the Antichrist. The commonly held objections based on people's knowledge of prophecy are incorrect. And I addressed those in the other video, the snake bite video. And the mark of the Antichrist is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It does not need an additional technology to go with it. It does not need some form of false religious worship, such as a worship of a statue, to go with it. Those commonly held objections are also answered in the other video. But make no mistake, it is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. Full stop. This is a better explanation because Brown, okay, so I had speculated, so Brown was political and he advocated for civil rights, but he was not a leftist or a socialist. In fact, he was criticized by the left for not being more leftist and socialist, and he was famously a supporter of Trump. He was a Trumper. Okay? So, and that's why this is good that Jim Brown is used for this symbolism of conscientious objection, because he organized the Cleveland Summit. And it points to his jersey number, and all that points to the thing through the thing disease, the red liquid that, goes through your veins that gets diseased because of the thing that people put inside themselves. Okay. But Jim Brown himself isn't being used because he is in alignment personally with the spirit of Antichrist. Okay. Muhammad Ali was hospitalized in Scottsdale, Arizona on June 2nd, 2019 with a respiratory illness. Though his condition was initially described as fair, it worsened and he died the following day at the age of 74 from septic shock. All right, first of all, speaking of Cleveland and LeBron James, this was the month, I don't know which date exactly, but anyway, this was the month that they won the championship in 2016, because the NBA Finals are in June, and they won in 2016. I should actually look to see if there's a connection there. But anyway, Muhammad Ali died on June 2nd from a respiratory illness after it worsened, and he died from septic shock. So I wrote to my friends here, all right, this is correct. Jim Brown ties to Ali, and Ali is about being a conscientious objector. Ali died on June 2nd, 2019, an extremely prophetic date on which a Thunderbird jet crashed right after flying over Obama as he delivered a commencement speech to the Air Force in the 38th state, the high place, Colorado, the highest state. Denver is the highest major city in America. Okay. 38th president, because Ford was the only president never to have been elected vice president or president, just like Barack Obama will be when he is made president again. He will be appointed just like Gerald Ford. On that same day, a Blue Angels jet also crashed in the 16th state, 4 times 4, 44th president. Both jets were number 6 in their squads. The Thunderbird's pilot was preparing to land after the 6-ship formation flyover, and again it crashed right after it flew over Obama. This Blue Angels pilot, who was from the 38th state, was 32 years old, and he crashed in Smyrna, Tennessee, 10 days, which hints at the 10 days of testing of faith for the church of Smyrna, the letter that Jesus wrote a letter to in the book of Revelation. It was 10 days before Pentecost. He crashed in Smyrna 10 days before Pentecost, which is the feast in the Hebrew calendar that symbolizes the church. And Pentecost literally means 50th day, and that Pentecost was the day that 50 souls died in the Orlando gay nightclub shooting, which was the deadliest shooting at the time. 50 people died on the 50th day Pentecost, which makes it clearly a sign from God. And that was 10 days after the plane crashed. The Blue Angels plane crashed, which hints at fallen angels in Bible prophecy. And Barack Obama is a fan of the Duke Blue Devils. Okay, so it was 10 days that the plane crashed in Smyrna, in Tennessee, and that's amazing because of the 10 days of testing for the church of Smyrna before the 50 people died on the 50th day, Pentecost. Okay, Ali died 1,656 days. Okay, it was 1,656 years from creation to Noah's flood. And the flood occurred because of the corruption of things. If you can read it, things there. Okay, things the building blocks of your cells. Okay, the code. Okay, that was the reason for the flood judgment. It was the corruption, right? In the story, there's 1,656 number. I'm not a young Earth believer, by the way. I think the supposed evidence for that is rubbish. I do believe in an old Earth, but it is nonetheless a story from God. Okay, and it is the numbers are relevant. And so anyway, Ali died 1,656 days before the first mark of the Antichrist was administered on December 14th, 2020. On that Pentecost too, there was an emergency evacuation from Megiddo National Park in Israel due to a forest fire on that Pentecost. That's another thing. It's another prophetic sign. Megiddo is the location. That's where we get the word Armageddon from, if you know that word, which in pop culture is known to be associated with the end times, Armageddon, right? Because the world, the nations that will gather to destroy Israel will come to the plain of Megiddo in Israel, outside of Jerusalem and Judea. Okay, so anyway, there was an emergency evacuation in that national park in Israel on that Pentecost. Okay, on the same day as the 50 people died on the 50th day, Pentecost, in the gay nightclub shooting. Because homosexuality is a sin, and it's not hateful to say that. It's actually the opposite. It would be hateful to not tell someone to warn someone that they are on their way to hell for their sin. Okay, so, all right, now, from the description of Ali's cause of death on Wikipedia, it sounds analogous to the CVD disease in 2020. Okay, so Ali ties to Jim Brown through the Cleveland Summit, and that's why I went a little bit off onto a tangent here. Well, it wasn't completely, because the pilot that crashed was 32 years old, and Jim Brown wore jersey number 32. Ali ties to the pilot who crashed on the day that he died, right? And he was 32 years old, and he was the prophetic pilot of the two, because he crashed in Smyrna, and he was a Blue Angels, and so it was a symbolic of fallen angels. Anyway, I explained it. Okay, let's move on. As I mentioned, the crashed Blue Angels hinted at fallen angels. Obama is a Blue Devils fan. 2 number 6 jets, and the 6-ship formation flyover hints at 666. And very importantly, Smyrna, Tennessee, in the 16th state, which is at 4 times 4 and the 44th president, is next to Nashville, and is within the path of totality, or was within the path of totality of the eclipse in 2017 that peaked nearby for 160 seconds in the 16th state. Okay? And 160 seconds is 4 times 40 seconds, which hints at the 44th president. And 1,656 days after the death of Ali, who was the Cleveland Summit, which was what the Cleveland Summit was about, his conscientious objection. I didn't explain that. So the Cleveland Summit was a gathering of other black men, I think actors and athletes, or maybe just athletes, I forget. So anyway, that was the Cleveland Summit. They gathered together to talk to Ali and hash it out, see if he was making the right decision. To just, because not that everyone is supporting him already when they arrived. They just wanted to hear him out and give him some advice, type of thing. Okay. So the Cleveland Summit, again, was 42 years to the day that Obama went down to Cairo. Jim Brown was a beast, and he was number 44 and number 32. He won the 32nd NFL championship. 32nd prime number, it was 131. Okay, and the death of the pilot that pointed to the eclipse, because it was in the path of totality of the eclipse, was the day of the first thing. Oh yeah, 1,656 days after the death of the pilot was the day of the first thing. Okay, and it was also the day of the 4.4 magnitude earthquake, 4 times 4 miles deep, on the northwest flank of Hawaii's highest point, Mount Kilauea. No, Mount Mauna Kea, I believe. And Obama is from Hawaii. That was why this earthquake occurred on the state. All right. Now, also in Daniel chapter 8, it says that the Antichrist will come from the north and the west to Jerusalem, and directly, due northwest from Jerusalem, exactly northwest, is Rome, the home of the first Antichrist. But the earthquake was on the northwest flank of the nation's highest peak, because Bama means high place once again, and Obama is from Hawaii. And so anyway, this first thing and earthquake on December 14th, 2020 was exactly the middle date in between the 2017 eclipse and the 2024 eclipse. And their paths engender an X, a mark, over the country, which is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. Because, because in Ezekiel chapter 9 in the Bible, the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist would have been a Tav mark. The Tav in Paleo-Hebrew was an X. The paths of these eclipses that will engender an X over America, the path of the second eclipse in 2024, the path of totality will pass directly over Cleveland. In fact, the center of the path of totality will pass directly over Cleveland. And this is how it ties back to Jim Brown, who played for Cleveland, and his organization of the Cleveland Summit, which was the Muhammad Ali Summit, which was about conscientious objection based on religious grounds to a dictate from the state. And so again, and by the way, the first eclipse, the 2017 eclipse, as I mentioned, God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter. Well, there were 4 disasters that followed the 2017 eclipse that confirmed the matter that the 2017 eclipse was a judgment warning of destruction of America. And those 4 witnesses were the 3 hurricanes and the California firestorm in October of 2017. And how that is proven is explained in other videos. Okay, so I'm not going to go off onto too much. So the thing about God's big picture of signs is that it is extremely difficult to explain because it is three-dimensional, and to explain something, it requires these witnesses to confirm it, and they and themselves require explanation and further witnesses to confirm that, which requires further explanation and witnesses to confirm that, and on into infinity. And it is all interconnected. It is three-dimensional and not two-dimensional. It's not linear, and that's why it can go off like that into infinity. It's the same as the Bible. The Bible is not a linear document. One can take an infinite number of pathways through the Bible. So you have to cut it off somewhere, and you have to just take my word for things, because otherwise we just go off into an infinity. And so the point that I was originally trying to make is that the 2017 eclipse was confirmed with disasters, and the flood in the account of Genesis occurred after this symbolic number of 1,656. Muhammad Ali died, and then 1,656 days after his death is the earthquake and the midpoint of the eclipses. Okay, and again, the eclipse in 2017 was confirmed with disasters, which the first one of them, incidentally, is flood symbolism. And arguably the first three hurricanes are flood symbolism. And so the midpoint of the eclipses is essentially the same as the 2017 eclipse in terms of symbolism. And the death of Muhammad Ali connects with 1,656 days to the midpoint of the eclipses, and 1,656 is symbolism for the flood. So that's straightforward. I hope you got that. So that's why this is all relevant. Now, the thing is that the other eclipse will pass over Cleveland, and the Muhammad Ali Summit was in Cleveland. It was actually called the Cleveland Summit, organized by Jim Brown, who played for the Cleveland Indians. The Cleveland Browns. And so that's why all of this is relevant. And what I am saying is that the midpoint date of the eclipses, the day that the first thing was given, and the eclipse is making an X, which is symbolism for the thing that affects one's chromosomes, which is in the shape of an X. So that midpoint is essentially the symbolic date for the two eclipses. And that date, again, is 1,656 days after the death of Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali, the purpose of him in God's signs, is the Muhammad Ali Summit in Cleveland regarding his conscientious objection. And this hints at the conscientious objection to the mark of the Antichrist, the thing, the X. And this is exactly why the second eclipse will pass over Cleveland. What I am saying is that the second eclipse will be pointing to Cleveland. It will also pass over Dallas. These are the two major cities that the second eclipse will pass over. Dallas is symbolic of the American church, specifically the American Evangelical Church. It is known as the capital of evangelicalism, and it is the home of the seminaries that churn out the nation's pastors, that teach the heretical doctrine that they learn in those seminaries, the Nicolaitan doctrine, which I will explain in a minute. Dallas is the home of this. God is very displeased with this. He's displeased with pastors, first of all. Paid pastors are in themselves a spiritual abomination. It's strictly forbidden, I should say. The mark of the Antichrist is a spiritual abomination. Paid pastors are strictly forbidden, according to Jesus' words. And so anyway, I'll get to that in a second. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the whole point of this Muhammad Ali connection is to point to Cleveland and his conscientious objection to the dictate from the state, which is a foreshadow of the conscientious objection that Christians will need to do and should have already done to the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing. Many Christians have taken it. I should say, quote unquote, Christians have taken it already. And that's a problem, and it is judgment for the church. That's why that has happened, and that'll be explained in a minute as well. 690. Okay, this is a number from the most central prophecy in the Bible, which is the 70 weeks prophecy, which is broken into 69 weeks and 70 weeks. And after the 69th week, in the 70th week, is the period of the Antichrist and the end times, and that's why God uses 690 days connections. And so 690 days after the first thing, the middle point of the eclipses, the two eclipses that will engender an X, because the second eclipse in 2024 will cross over the path of the first eclipse in 2017, exactly where it peaked, over an area of the country nicknamed Little Egypt. And I was going to go off on a tangent, but why not? So, and the first eclipse peaked over Little Egypt exactly 3,000 days after Obama went down to Cairo, Egypt. And in the Exodus, after the Hebrews left Egypt, 3,000 souls perished in the desert after their rebellion against God. But anyway, back to this middle point between the two, and the X, by the way, also hints at chromosomes, which is what the thing affects and changes. That's why it's a spiritual abomination. It changes chromosomes, okay? And so that's why the X. That's the reason for the X. The two eclipses are identifying the mark of the Antichrist, in other words. And so there's a middle date, okay? And that was the date of the first X. That was the date of the first X, the first thing. And 690 is this prophetic number that symbolizes the end times, as I just explained, of the Antichrist. And so 690 days after the middle date of the X was November 3rd, 2022. And that was the day of many prophetic signs, including the rollout of NASA's Artemis to the launch pad. In their tweet that mentioned Billy Joel, which was a prophetic sign, which is explained in other videos, that pointed to Billy Joel's album Stormfront, and it also pointed to the 23rd item, because Billy Joel was nominated for 23 Grammy Awards. It pointed to and there were other 23 signs on that date. It pointed to including the prophetic home run by the player that played college for the University of Maine, the 23rd state. I could spend an hour talking about what happened on November 3rd, 2022, and I've made other videos about it, so I won't do it again here. And again, to explain something requires witnesses, which require witnesses and explanations, which require witnesses and explanations. But the point is that the prophetic home run that he hit pointed to his college career, which was played for the University of Maine, which is named after the 23rd state and is in the 23rd state, and that was part of this prophetic sign involving the number 23 is my point here. On the day of this Billy Joel sign, and Billy Joel in his career was nominated for 23 Grammy Awards. And this is relevant because this is leading to what I'm talking about. I'm just interjecting right here, but I'm about to talk about how the Stormfront album containing the song We Didn't Start the Fire is all about pointing to the 23rd item in the song. Anyway, the 23rd item in the song on the album Stormfront, which is the song We Didn't Start the Fire, which is the thing. So the song We Didn't Start the Fire is a list of 118 historic events from the year that the singer was born, Billy Joel, to the present when he made the song, 1989. And so it's a list of these historic events, but it just so happens to be that the 23rd one is this. It's the thing. God pointed to it with the 23rd item because Billy Joel was nominated for 23 Grammy Awards. And also, as I explained in the other videos, the rookie that hit the prophetic home run And why that's prophetic is explained. The home run pointed to his career, college career in the 23rd state. And furthermore, the Antichrist's number is 23, the basketball president who wore jersey 23 when he played basketball in high school. And the thing affects one's 23 chromosomes. That's the reason for why the number 23 as well. The Antichrist's number is 23, but so is the mark of the Antichrist in a sense, because the mark of the Antichrist affects one's 23 chromosomes. And also, this is another reason why God pairs 9 and 23 together. The basketball president became president in 2009 and wore jersey 23 and will become the president again in 2023. That's a pairing of 9 and 23 that identifies the Antichrist. However, 9 and 23 are also paired together to identify the mark of the Antichrist, because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in Ezekiel chapter 9, which would have been a Tav mark, which was an X, and it affects 23 chromosomes, pairs of chromosomes, and so that's a pairing of 9. Ezekiel chapter 9, which hints at the X, and chromosomes, which is 23 pairs, and so that's why 9 and 23 are also paired together to identify what is the mark of the Antichrist. And Artemis was hit by a storm. That's why the storm front, and the World Series sign pointed back to the 1989 World Series earthquake on October 17th, 1989, which happens to be the exact date that Billy Joel released the album Stormfront. And the song "We Didn't Start the Fire" is his, third number one hit. The player that hit the prophetic home run on the day of NASA's prophetic Billy Joel tweet was player number 3. And that World Series was the 33rd anniversary of the 1989 World Series earthquake that occurred on the same day that Billy Joel's album was released, which contains the song "We Didn't Start the Fire," that was his third number one hit. And for which he won a Grammy and all that. But the 1989 World Series earthquake was known for the fires that it started in San Francisco. And San Francisco hints at the Antichrist, Pope Francis, who will enforce the mark of the Antichrist. And so that's why all that was amazing. Okay. So, and the rollout of Artemis was 7 days. And in the account of Noah's flood, God gave Noah a 7 days warning before the flood judgment. It was 7 days before Hurricane Nicole hit Artemis on the launch pad. In fact, the strongest winds recorded for Hurricane Nicole were recorded at the Kennedy Space Center. The eye of the storm hit 70 miles south, a prophetic 70, and thus the highest winds, because the highest winds aren't typically where the exact eye hits, the highest winds were recorded at Artemis. And why did NASA have its big, expensive Artemis space launch system on the launch pad during a hurricane? Because it was designed by God. The hurricane came from nowhere. It wasn't expected to become the hurricane that it was, and it did so rapidly without warning, and it wasn't expected to come their way or something to that effect as well. And it takes 9 hours to roll the Artemis in and out of the warehouse, the hangar, and so the NASA could do nothing about it. When Ian and Nicole paralleled Charlie and the other hurricane in 2004, I forget the name, as they both engendered uncanny parallel X's over Florida. So the mainstream meteorological community was a little bit freaked out because of the uncanny parallel. The two hurricanes in 2004 and the two hurricanes in 2022 entered exactly the same locations at the same intensity and all that, and they both engendered X's over Florida, which hinted at the X over America. Okay, and 2004 and 2022 are 18 years apart, and 18 years is 6 plus 6 plus 6 years, which is also 6 times 6 times 6 months. Okay, and so yeah, and so the storm front, so you get it, right? The storm hit 7 days later after the Artemis was rolled out, with the Billy Joel reference to Billy Joel, who had the Stormfront album. Anyway, and the 7 days in between the two, the rollout and the storm, is extremely uncanny because of the 7 days warning that God gave Noah before the storm, the flood judgment, began. This was, so the storm, Hurricane Nicole, was on the same day as 3 cooling towers that were 59 years old each, because they were all built in the same year. But they were 3 cooling towers were demolished, collapsed in Paradise, Kentucky, and the rapper Coolio, as in Cooling Towers, that sang the song Gangster's Paradise, famous for that song, died at the age of 59 on the day of Hurricane Ian. Okay? So on the day of Hurricane Ian, the 59-year-old died, whose name is Coolio, who was known for the song Gangster's Paradise. And on the other hurricane day, Hurricane Nicole, that was the same day that 3 cooling towers were collapsed in Paradise that were 59 years old. Coolio died at the age of 59. Now, the reason why there were 3 of them that were 59 years old is because that hints at 3 times 59, which is 177, which is the number of days in between blood moons and a blood moon tetrad. But that's also, lights in the sky symbolism. Genesis 1:14 tells us that the primary reason for the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs, and the 2 brightest lights in the sky are the sun and the moon, and when they conjoin together, they engender eclipses, perfect ones. Anyway, it's the only place in the universe that we know of where there are perfect eclipses, because of the coincidence of the sun being exactly 400 times bigger than the moon and exactly 400 times further away from the Earth and the moon. Anyway, Paradise Power Plant in Paradise, Kentucky is near the eclipse path. And so that's why, the eclipse is there, the 3 times 59-year-old cooling towers, because it hints at 177, which hints at eclipses. That's all amazing. It's a bit of a tangent. It's not, I went off on a tangent there, but it all originated with the death of the pilot in Smyrna, next to Nashville, in the path of totality of the eclipse. And that's all relevant because Muhammad Ali died on the same day that the pilot died, and Muhammad Ali is tied to Jim Brown. But if you've made it this far into this video, maybe your jaw dropped after hearing all of that information there. Mine did. All right, now here we come to the big point of this, and Hurricane Nicole, which was the last of the 4 hurricanes here, these prophetic hurricanes that engender X's over Florida, which, as I just explained, point to the X that will be engendered over America, which will be the result of an eclipse that will pass over Dallas. Okay? And Cleveland, which hints at conscientious objection, and the Antichrist, for the reasons explained earlier. And Muhammad Ali's conscientious objection in the Cleveland summit. But Dallas, because this is the capital of evangelicalism, it is symbolic of the American church and the Church of Laodicea. Many believe, including myself, that the letters to the 7 churches also not only represent speak to each individual and to every individual now, but also they do symbolize the 7 stages of church history. The last church being symbolism for the modern evangelical church, the Church of Laodicea, that thinks that it is in need of nothing, as Jesus said and warned. And because of it being lukewarm, Jesus wants to vomit it out of his mouth. And this church thinks that it is rich and has prospered, but is blind, pitiable, and naked, and doesn't realize it. And that's key. It thinks that it is in need of nothing and doesn't realize it. They're all good. In other words, they're already saved, past tense, which is the heretical doctrine that Jesus said he hates. The Nicolaitan doctrine that he speaks about in these letters to the churches, that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war on in the end times with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And who teaches this doctrine and who submits to this doctrine? Evangelicals submit to these pastors that teach this doctrine, that learn this doctrine in the seminaries in Dallas, the capital of evangelicalism. And this heretical doctrine that is rooted in Gnosticism, literally, because Augustine corrupted the church with this doctrine in the 5th century, which was passed down to the modern church through Calvin and Luther, because Calvin disparaged all of the other early church writers in the centuries, well, in the 1st and 2nd centuries, long before Augustine, and he only quoted Augustine, and he titled his writings Systematic Augustinianism. Luther was an Augustinian monk, and so they revivified the Gnosticism that Augustine brought to the church, the Western church, because he was an official auditor in the Manichaean Gnostic sect for 9 years before joining the Catholic Church. His earlier writings were all right, but he later reverted back to his Gnosticism, and this influenced him and his writings, his latter writings, which were corrupted, and these are the writings that have influenced the church and people like Calvin and Luther. And so we have this Gnosticism, and John, in his epistle, called the Gnostics, it's who he is speaking about when he is writing that they are antichrists. And if you follow the logic, today's pastors that teach this doctrine that is influenced by Augustine's Gnosticism are antichrists. That's the simple logic, my friend. Furthermore, this model of church attendance, and that's another thing, the primary importance on church attendance and not doing the words of Jesus. And as a ritual to convince yourself that you are all right. I once asked a person that was traveling with his friend, just as an example, just an anecdote, because obviously this is just an anecdote, but I once asked a young man who was traveling with his friend in a hostel, so what do you do? And he didn't understand the question, naturally. Most Christians wouldn't understand the question. They don't. I've been to churches and asked them, so what do you do? And they don't understand the question. They think and if they do, it's maybe they think that I'm asking them what they do for a living or something. But obviously we're in a church, and I'm asking you, what do you do for the kingdom? But they don't do anything for the kingdom. So this guy was traveling around Europe, just as an example, and when I explained to him the question, he then answered that, well, I play the drums at church. And so this is just an example of how, this is the ritual of going to church. But anyway, the model of the present day model of going to church is inherited from the Catholic system, which is Nicolaitan, and I'll explain that. But the model of sitting in rows and listening to a pastor preach for about an hour and then paying him like you're attending a concert. That's what it is. He steps onto a stage and performs for an hour and rarely quotes the words of Jesus. Because if you do, and if you do a survey of this, and it has been done at various different churches, the average mention of the writings of Jesus, the words of Jesus, the red letters in the Bible, you have to attend 2.6 sermons to hear one of them. 20% of the passages quoted in the Bible are words of Jesus. 13% is one study. But anyway, you get the point. You'll very rarely hear it. And the reason is because most of them contradict their theology. And so does, for that matter, the letters to the 7 churches, which brings us to one of these horrendous things about the modern church's theology, which is this propensity to create these workaround solutions to the many, many, many passages that flatly contradict their theology, including the letters to the 7 churches. And so the Christian will say today, the evangelical will say today, well, those letters were written for those that will be left behind, after, quote unquote, so-called supposed left behind after the rapture, at the beginning of the so-called supposed 7 years. And that's a different dispensation. So the workaround solution is the heresy of dispensationalism. And that's why all of these mentions of Jesus talking about the works of the churches can be disregarded, because they are supposedly in the quote-unquote dispensation of grace, right? And then after the rapture, those will be left behind. Well, then they will have to perform works because there's no longer any grace, supposedly. Because supposedly the Holy Spirit has been taken away. That's another major error of interpretation from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, which is rooted in their false theology also. Never mind that these 7 letters that were written to these churches were actually written to churches in the church age, the supposed dispensation of grace. Because these letters are obviously written to the 7 churches of Asia Minor in history, which is a long time before the rapture. So how can they only apply to those after the rapture? But that logic doesn't register with them because, they don't want to believe anything other than their false theology, which is that they are already, quote unquote, saved, past tense, not on the path to salvation, by following the words of Jesus, which he said to do. And those that are his disciples will be those that do his words, as he said, which is an example of a passage that contradicts their theology. Another thing about these pastors, besides their getting paid, which Jesus forbid, and these pastors twist the writings of Paul, the passages of Paul, and misinterpret them to prove that they do and can be paid and should be paid. But I will just give you a passage, just one of a couple, of a number of passages and this is words of Jesus. He said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand, a paid pastor, and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep. John 10:11 through 13. That's paid pastors. Furthermore, this whole leadership thing is another thing that Jesus forbid. Jesus said to not follow anyone that claims to be a leader. Do not call anyone the father or a leader or a teacher. Pastors are teachers? What are you talking about? Jesus said to not call anyone a teacher. People are submitting to these teachers? What are you talking about? Jesus forbid that. You need to study the words of Jesus and the ones that contradict this modern system of what is called church. Okay? Another quote from Jesus. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Luke 16:13. Okay, so pastors preaching the word for money, there's very good reason why it is forbidden to preach the word for money. Preaching the word for money invariably and inevitably leads to the watering down of the gospel and the message and Jesus' words, which is why it's somewhat rare to hear pastors preach Jesus' words, something like 13% of the time, and selectively. So that's for example, why. Because pastors are concerned about their income. They're motivated to make an income, and they don't want to scare people away, and so they don't get too controversial. They don't in terms of politics, for example, but also that's why they don't preach the controversial words of Jesus and give them the doctrine that they want to hear, which is very nice, the once saved, always saved Calvinism doctrine, right? And predestination and all of that. All of that is, by the way, that's also what led over the ages, over the centuries, to the increasing corruption in Catholicism, which became more and more man-made religion over time, because it was more and more over time catered to bringing in the masses into the church. In Catholic countries, everyone is a Catholic, everyone, right? And to do that, they had to bring them in, and to incorporate them all in, they watered it down. It's like McDonald's. McDonald's is the perfect analogy. There's even a business term for this business model. I forget what it is. But McDonald's is successful because it sells the minimum product that's desirable by the most amount of people. And that's like Catholicism, for example. But it's barely different within the modern, the evangelical model of going to church, or the Protestant model of going to church. It's just it's inherited from the Catholic Church. It's essentially the same. This model of sitting in rows and listening to the man on the stage for about an hour and paying them. And anyway, that inevitably leads to the watering down of the message, like McDonald's. You know, that's why the laity, I even about to say the word, the laity, you know, that whole concept of clergy and laity is what is the result of money being involved in church. There's other passages too. When Jesus sent out his disciples, they weren't to receive money, right? To preach the word. Now, things require money, and there is legitimate evangelism that requires assistance, but not paid pastors. That doesn't require assistance. Furthermore, we should not be calling anyone a teacher anyway. And we shouldn't, furthermore, be gathering in the manner that churches do, sitting in rows, listening to someone for an hour, and at the same time being forbidden from saying anything. Because if you were to say anything to the group as a member of the body of Christ during one of these ritualistic assemblies that today people call church, you will be escorted out of the building immediately, because the teacher, quote unquote, is the gatekeeper of doctrine, and they gatekeep the doctrine that Jesus said he hates. And there's another passage, incidentally, where Jesus speaks about the master of the house. If he had known that when the hour he was coming, he would not allow the break-in of the thief. Well, the thief is Jesus. And we're talking about the masters are the preachers, the pastors. And that's why you can't get into a church and say anything about the timing of the Lord. That's what that passage is speaking to. But you can't get up into the church and say anything, for that matter, and let alone anything that contradicts what they're saying. So, and these people that go to these churches willingly submit to this nonsense. And so anyway, what it is also is a parallel with dictatorial socialism, communism, because it's the same thing. It's a direct parallel, in fact, because in communism, there's censorship of speech. So before I explain that, the restriction of people speaking in church is the cutting off of the body of Christ. That's what these pastors do that are paid, which they shouldn't be. And they cut off the body of Christ from being the body of Christ. And so it is an unhealthy body. And you can't, for example, receive the information that I'm talking about in a church because the gatekeeper of the church will have none of it. And so it's a socialist censorship, and that's a parallel with socialism, is the censorship and the the dictatorship of information disseminating from the state, the top-down dissemination of information, and only that information, right? And another thing about socialism is it procures dependency on the state, and the citizens become infantile. The citizens in communist countries are not really citizens. They're just servants of the state. They're submissive to the state. They are infantile, and they're not mature, independent, responsible people in communist states. And that's where we're headed with the ever-encroaching communism in the West and America today, and that's why the population is becoming increasingly infantile and more dependent on the state. It's a direct parallel with communism and socialism and dictatorship. Well, that's what happens in the church. The people go to get spoon-fed the watered-down stuff that the pastors talk about and talk to the church as if they are infants. And so it's a parallel with communism and socialism, which is evil by nature. Communism is evil, right? Okay, so that's another thing too. Okay, but the thing about the doctrine that they teach, which is the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, is this too. The word Nicolaitan is translated from a Greek word that means ruling over the laity. Several Bible commentators explain how this word refers to establishing human religious authorities over God's people, while the Schofield reference notes tells us that the Greek word translated Nicolaitans is derived from two words that mean to conquer the people. Schofield goes on to describe how this word refers to the earliest form of the notion of a priestly order or clergy, which later divided an equal brotherhood into priests and laity, which is while the theologian John Gill suggests the Nicolaitans were an early version of the Church of Rome, in other words, Catholicism, that is those who declared complete authority over God's people. And that's what pastors do. It's a watered down version of Catholicism. It's not like the Reformation changed everything. It's just a different variation of it. Right? We still assemble just like the Catholic Church, and the pastors are essentially priests, and they have the authority, etc. They're the gatekeepers of information and everything, right? And Jesus said he hates all of this. But also, God has clearly demonstrated in his big picture of science, and the predictions being made in this video will prove this. And that is the purpose of this prediction from God. Make no mistake. Otherwise, there is no purpose for the prediction and this video and video channel, which is that the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, specifically, God has specifically and precisely identified as being sovereign grace, reformed theology, the theology that is taught in the seminaries in Dallas, and free grace, which both of them come in the packages of Calvinism and dispensationalism, and they both lead to the heretical doctrine of once saved, always saved, and the myth of imputed righteousness, as evangelicals understand it. And also, our righteousness is as filthy rags. One verse that Luther took out of context and misinterpreted purposefully to develop his entire theology. Not to mention, Luther said that he wanted to remove certain books from the Bible, including the book of James and the book of Revelation, because, rightly so, they contradict his theology. But that's not how the Bible works. And furthermore, the Bible isn't to be studied systematically. It's not Augustinian, systematic Augustinianism. That's what evangelicals do. They isolate passages of Paul and ignore other passages of Paul and interpret the writings of Jesus through the lens of Paul instead of the other way around, which is why they quote Paul far more than they quote Jesus. And I've even heard the people, and it's becoming progressively worse, and people are today, some people are talking about how the words that Jesus spoke was for a different dispensation. And the modern current dispensation begins with a certain point in the ministry of Paul. Absolutely astounding, absolute blasphemy. But that's like common in evangelical culture today, that thought. Not all evangelicals, but that is a thread in the culture today. And anyway, another thing, all Christians will be raptured, and predestination, God knows ahead of time before they're even born whether they're going to hell or heaven. That's complete evil. Their God is my devil. That belief is the belief in the devil for me. And so anyway, so that's the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day. And that's why the Hurricane Nicole, to bring it back to the point here, Hurricane Nicole is pointing to this, the Nicolaitan doctrine that Jesus said he hates, and which is why the judgment on the church, which is symbolized by Dallas, with the X, the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing which the vast majority of Christians have taken. And that's why. It's judgment on them. As Peter said, judgment begins with the church. And that's why the second eclipse will pass over Dallas and then Cleveland. Conscientious subjection with the Cleveland Summit, and Dallas symbolic of the American church, the church of the Nicolaitans that think they are in need of nothing because of their doctrine, which is the root of the bad fruit of the church today, which is why evil has been allowed to gain the ground that it has because of the Nicolaitan doctrine and the shining of their light inside the four walls of the church, etc. And the lack of preaching in the streets. I mean, who does anything like that today? The very one in maybe 1,000 or 10,000. Yet everyone should be doing it. At least if they don't have the courage to speak like that, they should be handing out flyers or something. And by the way, if you'd like the file for the flyer I hand out, which I think is the most appropriate for the time that we are in, please email me and I will forward it to you. My email will be at the end of this video or another video. It's at the end of many of the videos. So obviously when the prediction comes to pass, you'll know that you'll need to watch every minute of every video. So anyway, so here's the proof of this, what I'm talking about, and the precise identification of what the Nicolaitan doctrine is of our day. On the day of Hurricane Nicole, that ended up engendering the X over Florida and hit the Artemis on the launch pad, this Hurricane Nicole flooded the main street of a town or city named Hutchinson in Florida. And there was a viral video of two sharks swimming over this river, or over the road of the ocean, of the water from the ocean. Okay, the surge coming in from the ocean, two sharks swimming in tandem, one a little bit ahead of the other one, which was amazing symbolism for the two antichrists, the first and second antichrist, the first one being Pope Francis, the second one being Barack Obama. And no, the false prophet, the second one, does not mean that Francis is the second one. It's just symbolism. Furthermore, the Antichrist is first apostate from his seat of authority, which is the seat of Peter, supposedly in Rome. And pastors are emulations of that. They're just watered down versions of that, which is why they're also Antichrist, spirit of Antichrist, paid pastors. And don't get me wrong, some of them can do a good thing, and God can be working through some of them. But the paid pastors is Antichrist, and the whole church system is Antichrist. The way that people go to church and pay a pastor to perform for an hour, and are not allowed to say anything. Okay, so the two sharks come out of the ocean, they come out of the sea, And in the book of Revelation in chapter 13, the beast, these two sharks are beasts, they come out, the beast comes out of the sea, which is symbolic of that. But the thing is that this all happened in this prophetic sign, this viral video of these two sharks was in Hutchinson Beach, which points to and it was Hurricane Nicole, which obviously hints at the Nicolaitan doctrine. And it's one of many signs that God has used to point to Anne Hutchinson, the leader of the Free Grace movement in the spiritual founding of America, which was the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which her and her movement threatened to destroy the colony, break up the colony, and wreck it, which is why she and her followers were banished. And afterwards, she was murdered by Indians. She wouldn't have been murdered by Indians had she been right with God, with her fierce opposition to those that disagree with her doctrine, which is the case with these Nicolaitans today. They claim that you aren't saved unless you believe the precise intellectual doctrine that they have. You're, in other words, saved by holding a mental, intellectual assent to agreement to their doctrine, not by anything you do or anything else, but having and holding the precise doctrine. You have to be a Calvinist to be saved because you have to have the right doctrine. But that doesn't align with the apostles and the early church, with the Apostles' Creed, for example. Anne Hutchinson was the leader of the Free Grace movement, the Free Grace controversy, also known as the Antinomian controversy. And today her theology is widespread within the evangelical culture. And Hutchinson began, I'm reading from the Wikipedia page actually, Hutchinson began to accuse the local ministers, except for Cotton and her husband's brother-in-law, John Wheelwright, of preaching a covenant of works rather than a covenant of grace. And many ministers began to complain about her increasingly blatant accusations, as well as certain unorthodox theological teachings. Sound familiar? Yes, today, free grace, cheap grace people are just as divisive and accusatory as Anne Hutchinson and her followers, which is also why it's evil, because it's divisive, and they're divisive about it, and accusatory about it, and condemning about it others that don't agree with them. So they don't realize it, though. They don't realize it that they're not in good standing. They're not doing good. They're with the likes of Anne Hutchinson and the Free Grace Antinomian controversy at the spiritual founding of America that threatened to break up the spiritual founding of America. But anyway, Anne Hutchinson, the leader of the Free Grace movement, also known as antinomianism, which is Latin for anti-law, is the root of that, antinomianism. Okay, and free grace comes in the package of dispensationalism, and like Calvinism, leads to once saved, always saved, and the lukewarm church of Laodicea, ultimately. And so that's there you have it. There is one example of how God identified precisely what the Nicolaitan doctrine is because it's the doctrine of Anne Hutchinson, which is pointed to through the two sharks in the viral video in the flood of the road in Hutchinson Beach. So if sovereign grace and free grace are rooted in Gnosticism and are heresy and is the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war on with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine, which is why, for example, most Christians could not recognize that the thing is the mark of the Antichrist. It was deliberate deception designed by God as judgment for them. Okay, so if that's the case, well, first of all, you can repent for taking it. There's no scripture that says you can't. And okay, so if that's the case, then what is the true doctrine? Saving grace. Okay. Now make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel, where I will explain much more and give you many passages in the Bible that supports what I am saying. But I'll just say a couple of things. There are almost twice as many do's and don'ts in the New Testament as there are the Old Testament. The idea that you don't need to do anything is completely false. Jesus said, those that do the words, that follow him and do his words, are his disciples. Okay? And that's another thing. In the false doctrine, there's this separation between discipleship and salvation. But that's not the Bible. They're not in two different boxes. They're one and the same. You need to be a disciple. And then you need to read Luke chapter 14, the cost of discipleship, where Jesus says, consider the cost before you even think about it. You know, if you're not going to follow through, don't even think about it. Just continue living it up. Enjoy your life, you know, sin, whatever. Don't even think about it, is what he's saying there. You need to consider the cost. And there is a cost. It's not just a one-time prayer and an intellectual agreement. You have to follow Jesus and his words. And that means studying his words and not get spoon-fed them once every other sermon, and particular ones, you know, not all of them, etc. So saving faith requires action. It requires receiving the lifeline that has been thrown to you. Jesus isn't going to jump into the water and swim you into the shore. You need to grab the lifeline and grab hold of it. You've been given a gift. You need to receive it. And that requires an action. You have to put out your hand to receive the gift, right? And so it's also illustrated in the Old Testament. There's two stages to salvation. There's justification and sanctification. And those are technical words for this, but there's believing, and Abraham was deemed righteous when he believed and trusted in God and his promise. But he also trusted his promise by taking action. He got up and left. He went to the promised land, right? But also, the second stage, the demonstration of faith, the actualization of one's faith. We are saved by faith, but nowhere in the Bible does it say faith alone, by the way. And the only place where it says, quote unquote, faith alone is when James said, you see, for a person is not saved by faith alone, which is why Luther wanted to remove the book of James, and why evangelicals avoid that book and also come up with workaround solutions to the problem that contradicts their theology. But anyway, Abraham was also called to demonstrate his faith when he was asked by God to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. And right before he was about to do so, God sent his angel to tell Abraham, stop, don't harm the boy, for now I know that you fear me. In other words, God didn't know prior to that, which is astounding. And that's another Greek idea about God. God knows everything. No, God gave us free will. He knows possibilities, but he doesn't know what you're going to choose. Otherwise, we wouldn't have free will. Anyway, God didn't know. That's what the text clearly says. What? The text doesn't say that? It says that. It says God didn't know, and there are many examples of what's called open theology, where God doesn't know what people will choose, okay, ahead of time. There are many other passages in the Old Testament that confirm that support that. But God didn't know that Abraham, feared him or not until he demonstrated his faith. And that is saving faith. And saving faith, in principle, involves taking action that involves some kind of risk and or sacrifice. That's saving faith. And that's why, for example, choosing to not take the mark of the Antichrist will likely, or probably has already for someone, involved a sacrifice, including, for example, losing one's job. And ultimately, as Bible prophecy says, facing starvation. Okay? That's why the purpose of the mark of the Antichrist and the purpose of the Antichrist and the purpose of the end times period primarily is to test the faith of Christians. Not the ones that are after the supposed dispensation of grace, but all Christians need to demonstrate their faith. Because if you get to heaven and you haven't done it, you haven't demonstrated your faith, you've missed out on something. And God doesn't want you to miss that. It's a beautiful thing. It's the purpose of it all. Demonstrating your faith through action. If you need to give your life to Jesus, literally. Jesus said you need to first die like a kernel of wheat and then grow to produce fruit, which is the meaning of the rebirth, being born again. It is the death of the self. But today, the typical Christian is living a life barely indistinguishable from non-believers. They're living for their careers and their family and their retirement and et cetera, vacations. I mean, how in the world could a Christian go on vacation? I don't understand. How do they have time for that? First of all, you should be acting like Jesus could return now, but the doctrine of imminence is false. But if you don't know when he's coming, then you should be acting like he's coming tomorrow. And so anyway, I think you get my point here, is that's what saving faith is, living solely for the kingdom, which means doing work. And that's what Christians don't do today. It's the do-nothing church because of the Nicolaitan doctrine that says they don't have to do anything. And to believe that they do have to do anything means that they're not saved. That's how it is evil deception from Satan. That's how Satan works. If you believe the truth, then you're not saved. That's how all of the other cults work too, by the way, whether it's Mormonism or Catholicism or Seventh-day Adventism. If you believe things that are contrary to what they're saying, then you're not saved. Same thing with evangelicalism. One more thing. Someone will say, well, what about the man on the cross that died next to Jesus? He didn't do anything. Well, that's why Jesus, the reply to that is, well, what about the bags of gold? Because he's speaking to Christians when he's talking about the bags of gold. Or what about in the book of John when he says you need to produce fruit, otherwise you'll be thrown into the fire. But the bags of gold are a great parable to illustrate this. The bags of gold represent our abilities and opportunities. And the man on the cross died right after he came to belief. And so that was his bag of gold. He arguably didn't have a bag of gold, right? He didn't have an opportunity. But we are judged by, and that's the key, we are judged by the number of bags of gold we have. Not everyone has the same amount of bag of gold. Not everyone has the same ability or opportunity. So it's true, you aren't saved by your works. But to say you can't earn your salvation, that sounds very Christian. It sounds good, but it isn't correct. And it is deception. Because that's not, it's not the Bible, first of all. There's no passage that says that. Furthermore, like I said, the only passage that says you're saved by faith alone is when James says you are not saved by faith alone. And so it's clear, though. Just look at the teachings of Jesus and, stop isolating the passages of Paul and interpreting everything of Jesus and ignoring passages that contradict your theology. So we have the bags of gold, which is the explanation. We are judged individually by our opportunities and abilities. So if you are, for example, an able person and have some knowledge about the kingdom and the gospel, and you aren't, for example, handing out flyers after work on car windshields, doing everything you possibly can, because Jesus says to love God with all your heart, mind, and strength. To do everything you possibly can. Are you doing that? Are you doing everything you possibly can, making the utmost, highest possible decision about what to do with your life in the moment, every moment? That's the goal. That's to be like Christ, to be like perfect, to be working for the highest possible good for the kingdom at all times. Or is some of your life focused on yourself and your personal goals, for example, right? So if you're making money, for example, are you using it for the kingdom? Are you using the money that you're working for in your job to go out and print flyers and hand them out after work, for example? Just for one example of many examples of what Jesus said he wants his disciples to do, work in that way, as well as other things that a disciple of Jesus must do. Once again, make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel. All right, I need to make a correction. It is a significant one, but it is inconsequential, as I will explain. I was incorrect. Muhammad Ali did not die on the same day as the pilot. The pilot died on the 2nd of June in 2016. The two planes that crashed, the Thunderbird's jet and the Blue Angels, they crashed on the 2nd. The other one, again, was the one that flew over Obama and crashed right after it flew over Obama. Both number 6 in their squads, and as I explained earlier. Okay, so that was the 2nd. And the following day was the 3rd. That was the day that Muhammad Ali died. Now, first of all, and I already knew this way back in 2016, that the two dates connect to each other. This is an example of how the two dates are part of the same sign. Okay, so this is one reason why it's inconsequential. Okay, so the reason why they are part of the same sign is because at the time that the jet that was flying over Obama crashed, Obama's Secretary of State, John Kerry, was in flight to Paris for a conference. And I didn't know this back in 2016, but the next day, the day of the conference in Paris, was the day that Muhammad Ali died. And as I'm explaining, the main reason for the prophetic significance of Muhammad Ali is the conference, the Cleveland Summit, the Muhammad Ali conference, right? So, but anyway, that conference is very prophetic because that was it was called the Middle East Peace Talks, I believe, or the Middle East Conference or something very close to that. I'm pretty sure it had the words Middle East in it. But the point of that is that it was a discussion between world leaders about what to do about Israel without Israel in attendance and Israel officially condemning the talks, which is very anti-Christ. It is quintessential Obama, the Antichrist, enabling such a talk and sending his Secretary of State to it. Because Obama is anti-Israel, that's his true colors. They were revealed at the end of his presidency in December of 2016 with the UN Resolution 2334, for example. And that's because Obama is a leftist. That's his true colors. He's a Marxist leftist, and Marxist leftists are anti-God, and they have spirit of Antichrist. That's why they are socialists. And there is no such thing as moderate socialism. Not that Obama is a moderate. There is no such thing. This is just another piece of wisdom for you. There is no such thing as a moderate liberal or a moderate socialist or a so-called democratic socialist. It all leads inevitably, it's just slower incremental steps to evil, which is socialism. It is evil because it requires, collectivism requires the state being primary, and that inevitably tramples on the rights of the individual and minorities. And for more reasons too, because it also negates personal responsibility, and the primary unit of a society is the individual. And and his responsibility to be an ethical person and a citizen. So, the socialists will say, well, what about these causes that require getting together collectively to solve? That individualism doesn't negate that. Okay, that's a red herring. That's a false argument that the left makes with their ideology, and including the center, so-called center left. They don't realize it, but they're naive. They don't know. They don't have any wisdom, and that's the actual the root of it all. In fact, as the Bible says, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God, and the secular left and socialists do not fear God, and that's why they have no wisdom. Their worldview is every policy, everything that they believe is wrong because the root of their worldview is wrong. Which is that they don't fear God, and they believe that people are essentially good, whereas the opposite is true. The biblical worldview is true. People are essentially corrupt and evil and are sinners. And that's why they get everything wrong, the left. Center left, far left, whatever you want to call it. Back to what I was saying is that this Middle East peace talk that was condemned by Israel, and Israel, without Israel in attendance, talk between world leaders about what to do about Israel, complete Antichrist. The day of that summit in Paris on June 3rd, 2016 happened to coincide exactly with the peak of the once in 200 years flood in Paris that caused much destruction when the river through Paris overflowed its banks into the city, including flooding the famous museum there, the Louvre, or however you pronounce it, the famous museum on the river there. So that was because that was a sign from God pointing to Genesis 15, where it says that those that bless Israel will be blessed, and those that curse Israel will be cursed. Ultimately, the nations that come against Israel in the end, in the next year, in other words, will be destroyed. And under the direction of Barack Obama, that is exactly what will happen with America. Okay, so back to what I was saying. So the two dates are connected that way. But what's also interesting is that Muhammad Ali is his prophetic symbolic significance is his summit. Maybe it was called the Middle East Summit, in fact, come to think of it. But, okay, so anyway, 1,656 days after that date, which was about a flood. Because the flood in Paris, because again, as I explained, 1,656 is a number associated with the flood, because the flood occurred in the book of Genesis 1,656 years, a symbolic 1,656 years after Adam. Okay, so that's why that's flood symbolism. And then on the 3rd of June, we had the flood, the peak of the flood in Paris on the same day as the summit, and Muhammad Ali died on that day, and he is known for his Cleveland summit. And 1,656 days inclusive count, when you have a large number like that, God frequently uses inclusive counts as equally as often as not. And anyway, so it's the same thing. It's 1,656 days to the middle date of the eclipses. And again, Muhammad Ali's summit was about conscientious objection, and the middle date of the eclipses are about the X, which is the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist, and Christians, quote unquote, will have or should have conscientious objection to it. What's also amazing here too is that, as I have explained, God has tied Muhammad Ali to Jim Brown in his prophetic signs, because Jim Brown organized the Cleveland Summit, which is the purpose symbolically of Muhammad Ali in the signs. And on the day of the news of Jim Brown's death was another famous summit, which was the Arab League summit that I explained earlier, in which the Antichrist symbolic figure the first Jewish leader, 44-year-old leader of the 44 million nation, Zelensky, attended, and the summit was about welcoming back Syria, and I explained how the death of Jim Brown connects with, how that day connects with 99 days and then 9 days to the day Israel will nuke Damascus, Syria, and Damascus, Syria, the gematria value of Damascus, Syria is 999. But anyway, the point is that Jim Brown's death is associated with a summit, just like Muhammad Ali's death. It's on the day of another prophetic summit. But not only that, like the summit on the day of Muhammad Ali's death, it regarded Israel, and this Arab League summit is pointing to Israel because it was the summit that welcomed back Syria, and it is predicted that Israel will nuke Syria, and Zelensky is the first Jewish leader of Ukraine. All right, now on the day of the news of Jim Brown's death, again, as I've been explaining already in this video, there are 2 dates that are prophetic for Jim Brown's death: the day that he actually died on May 18th, and the following day, which was the day it was first reported about his death. Okay? The day that it was reported about his death was the day that the stock market, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and God uses in his signs stock market or Dow Industrial Average numbers, the low of the day, the intraday low, was 33,336.66. Okay? This is a clear 666 sign. And again, as I have been explaining in this video, Jim Brown is used, not that he is himself, his character or his personality, Antichrist symbolism, but the signs that he is involved with are, for example, his jersey number, 44, him playing for only 9 years, as I explained, him playing for Cleveland, President Cleveland, the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, just like the 44th president will, etc., as I have been explaining. Also, he wore jersey 32, and the 32nd prime number is G100 is 131, which hints at the 131st word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, which is the word for the thing, disease, the red liquid that runs through people's veins, disease. And Jim Brown won the 32nd NFL championship, which was the last time that Cleveland won until 2016, and LeBron James, who wore 23, and 2016 hints at 216, which is 6 times 6 times 6, and the 44th president was born on the 216th day of the calendar year, and on and on. Okay, so sorry to give you too much of a recap, but so Jim Brown is Antichrist symbolism, and on the day of his death, or the report of the news of his death, the Dow had this 666 number in it, and it also had this 666 in the number was preceded by this series of threes, and this hints at the third term for the Antichrist, Barack Obama, which is identified or pointed to through Jim Brown, as I just explained, wearing jersey number 44, playing for Cleveland. President Cleveland skipped the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. Okay, so that's why that's relevant. Now, the day before, which was the day that he died, the Dow closed at 33,212.09. Now, this is astounding because the number 9, which is clearly isolated here, is, as I have said, the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. As from the Bible, it symbolizes God's judgment. Now, the reason why 212 is because this is the area code of Manhattan. Manhattan Island's area code is 212. So this is, in other words, judgment that will take place in Manhattan. Now, God pairs the numbers 9 and 13 together frequently. As I explained earlier, God God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works on the principle of second and third multiple witnesses confirming a matter, and one simple way in which he does this is through pairing certain numbers together, especially the number 9 with certain numbers together, and one of those numbers is 13. And the reason is because this hints at judgment from the Antichrist, because from the Bible the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist. Nimrod in the Tower of Babel story is a type, foreshadow of the Antichrist, and he was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 13th day of the month, and the two Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. Okay? So 9 and 13 are paired together. This 9 and this number, on the day that Jim Brown died, gives us a pairing with this 130 days connection, because 130 days hints at 13. This isn't the only instance of this. Okay, and so 130 days after this will be the day it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan, of which the area code is 212. So 130 days after this 9 and 212 is the date it is predicted that there will be a dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan. That's amazing. And the reason why this ties to Jim Brown and how Jim Brown is a witness confirmation of this is that the big story about Jim Brown is how he only played 9 years of his career, which, by the way, is another pairing of 9 with the 130 here, because he died 130 days before the predicted bomb in Manhattan. And Jim Brown, arguably the biggest part of his story is his football career that was cut short. At the time, he was still dominating the league because he quit to pursue acting. And the movie that he was filming at the time that he quit was the movie Dirty Dozen. Okay? It's a big part of his story, how he quit during the filming of Dirty Dozen. This was a major famous movie, Dirty Dozen, okay? Or I think it's called The Dirty Dozen, maybe. It's an older movie. It's regarded as one of a classic, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, most people have heard of it. So, okay, now the backstory to that is that he was a day late or something like that for his return to training for football because of his filming of this movie in Europe. And the owner of the team gave him some grief for this. And so Jim Brown said, okay, I quit. And then he just pursued acting for the rest of his career. Okay, or from there on. Okay, so but it was during the filming of Dirty Dozen. Okay, so this is important. This movie, Dirty Dozen, that Jim Brown is associated with. Okay, he was one of the main actors in this movie. And what is also astounding, amazing beyond words in what God has done here with this Dirty Dozen movie connection is that Jim Brown, as is explained in this video, is primarily about his association with Muhammad Ali and the Muhammad Ali Summit, the Cleveland Summit that Jim Brown organized, which regarded Ali's conscientious objection. And that summit was a summit of 12 black athletes. It was a dozen. There were a dozen men at that summit. That is amazing, and that is more confirmation of this Dirty Dozen. This is, what can you say? Only God could have done something like this. This movie, Dirty Dozen, is a big part of Jim Brown's life because that's when he quit. And it's a famous movie. And he quit his athletic career because of this movie. And Jim Brown also organized the athletic Black Men's Summit, 12 of them, to discuss together the implications and to discuss with Muhammad Ali about his conscientious objection. And the plot of this movie is about an explosion. The central focus of the plot is the explosion of this castle, okay, during World War II. The movie takes place during World War II, and it's about an explosion at the castle, okay, the climax of the movie, etc. Okay, the point of the movie. This team of Dirty Dozen is on a mission to explode the castle. Something to that effect, okay? Which is amazing because, again, this gives us the number 9 because this is when Jim Brown quit, was during Dirty Dozen after 9 years of dominating the NFL, and he was still dominating at the time. So why did he quit? Well, it was because of Dirty Dozen. So that gives us the number 9, and that pairs with the 130 days following this, as does the stock market sign, because it also gives us the number 9. And it gives us the 212, which hints at Manhattan, and 130 days later is the date that it was already known to be the date that it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan, and then this sign came along and gave us another confirmation of this. And so this is amazing. You know, I could make a video entirely just about this association between the stock market sign and Jim Brown and the predicted explosion in Manhattan. Okay, and then the following day after Jim Brown died was another stock market sign that was more confirmation, because 13 is Antichrist symbolism, and we have this 666 in the following day, and that was the day of the news of Jim Brown's death. So this is amazing here too. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.